Hi, everyone. Hello. Very happy to be here. Happy Thursday. Welcome and thank you all for joining our third semi-annual Remediation Summit. We're very proud to have many of the industry's preeminent cyber risk owners joining us today to share how they work to reduce cyber risk to their businesses. My name is Gal Gonen. I'm the Director of Marketing at Vulcan Cyber. Very, very happy to be here. Great, so I see a lot of people attending, which is awesome. Before we begin, I'd like to provide a quick orientation for this virtual platform, which is Zoom, as you all know. You can network with other event attendees or the speakers, Vulcan Cyber, myself, in the event chat. If you have any questions during one of the keynotes or the product sessions, please do so via the Q&A function. The entire event is being recorded, so we'll make sure to send it all when we are done. Great, I see people chatting, so that's very, very nice. Great, so let me just review the agenda real quickly. I'm gonna share my screen. Okay, so in the first hour, we're gonna hear from Yaniv Bar-Dayan, Vulcan Cyber CEO. We're going to hear from Matt Hurewitz, Best Buy Associate Director of Application Security and Security Architecture, and from Ryan Gurney, Wild Ventures, CISO in Residence. Thank you all for being here today. It's a pleasure. During the second hour, we're going to hear from several members of the Vulcan Cyber product and research teams. They're going to introduce cutting-edge Vulcan Cyber capabilities to all of you to know how you can measure and mitigate risk better. Great. Without further ado, I'd like to get started, and it's my very pleasure to introduce Yaniv Bar-Dayan, Vulcan Cyber CEO.
Thank you very much, Gal. And hello, everyone. I'm very, very, very excited to be here in the third Remediation Summit. I would appreciate if just someone in the chat can signal that you're hearing me well and you can see my screen. So I'll start. Meanwhile, I'll say perfect. I'll say that I'm flattered by the picture that Gal chose to put on the main slide. I wish I would have been, I would look like this in real life as well. Anyhow, I'm gonna spend about 15 minutes talking about cyber risk management in 2022. And how we in Vulcan Cyber, a company that grew out of vulnerability management, went through and are going through a transition to not only focus on vulnerability management, but actually talk about cyber risk as a whole. Now, the bigger concept and the bigger thing we have learned as we started from, again, the niche of vulnerability management, the niche of infrastructure, is that when we look at cyber risk, and particularly with different vulnerabilities that are coming up, also 3.5 years ago, but today, cyber risk practically owns us versus we own it. Data is muddy and hard to understand. Many tools produce a lot of duplicated data and many false positives. It's very, very, very hard for a security analyst, a vulnerability manager, an application security engineer, a cloud security engineer, or anyone who handles risk to really understand what you need to do first. This takes shape even more aggressively when we talk about the modern environment, the environment we're handling today. Because today, a misconfigured S3 bucket could have the same impact as an unpatched database. A problem in your homegrown applications that was a result of a bedwritten or a faulty written code could cause the same issue as an overprivileged admin in one of your SaaS applications. And because the attack surfaces had grown, it created many siloed sensors, very similar to what we had 10 and 15 years ago in the Security Operations Center when it came to network detection, endpoint detection, data detection, etc. This combined with processes that are unstructured, that are usually very, very, very hard to scale, that requires security people to work with non-security teams, many of them in most cases. So not only one, in many different adjacent platforms like Jira, ServiceNow, Slack, Teams, Freshdesk, Zendesk, and so on, creates a reality where it's very, very, very hard to understand risk, to collaborate around risk, to make sure we do what we are obligated to do under different regulations, but also just under our mere obligation as professionals in our field, and to practically own a risk and reduce it. So as we looked at and as we started from vulnerability management, what we also understood is that other programs like application security, like cloud security, but practically any other risk-driven program, identity and access management, for example, is another risk-driven program we want to address. All of them suffer from the same core problems. As we said, data is muddy, information is siloed, it's not correlated to the same understanding. And what we as a company are going through now, and what our customers are going through now, that we're very excited about as we approach 2022, is the ability for the first time in the industry to take information, not only from network infrastructure, code, or applications, but also from cloud, infrastructure as code, IoT, in the future, SaaS, and get all of this risk under one roof, while allowing organizations to drive security risk programs forward. The idea is simple. We want Vulcan to grow to become a similar entity to the entity that Atlassian is now for developers, to the entity that ServiceNow is now for IT, that Workday is now for HR, that Salesforce is now for salespeople. We want to build the operating system for cyber risk, so you practitioners, us, people who handle cyber risk daily, can go and take action quickly in a data-driven way on everything around risk in a scalable, hopefully as automated approach as possible, while still providing the data at the fingertips of our board, our auditors, our directors, our managers, so they can understand what is the impact of every action and how this impact eventually influences onwards. Now, when you look at the different surfaces that Vulcan handles today, you see network infrastructure, cloud, code, and app, but we definitely look at newer type of surfaces. SaaS is one of the biggest ones that we're planning to approach during 2022. We understand that many organizations are moving to SaaS, and the risk around SaaS is still unclear, sometimes non-structured. Do we talk about identities? Do we talk about the data? Do we talk about encryption? We are still figuring it out, and we are shouting out to the market today. Every person who has an opinion, who wants to discuss SaaS risk management with us, we would welcome a conversation. Our product teams are thinking about it. We think about it. Our marketing team thinks about it. But it's all under a bigger roof. It's under the bigger roof of moving and migrating from being what we were in the past 3.5 years, a vulnerability management company, and turning ourselves to what is very much needed, which is a cyber risk management company. And cyber risk management means more than CVEs on unpatched software. It means problems in your code, the outputs of your pen testing or bug bounties. It means the overprivileged users, as I said, and any future static risk, hygiene-oriented risk that you have that should live under one roof, under one context, and eventually in a position where you have everything you need from a data perspective and from an action perspective to actually take action. And lastly, before I wrap up the first session, I also want to say that when we look at 2022 and from the prospects of Vulcan as the company who tries to lead forward the cyber risk agenda in the market, we think about three main things. One, we are growing our presence globally, and we're looking to work with global organizations who are facing global challenges. Two, we are eager to handle and combat every cyber risk issue that you are facing, and we are eager to learn. One of the best things about starting a company, about building a startup, is that you are privileged to still change and adapt very quickly and work with your customers and with your prospects on solving their particular problems and their particular needs. And lastly, I want to say that as we are approaching 2022, one of the most amazing things, hopefully, is we can start getting back to in-person meetings and to meet all of you, not only through virtual platforms, but also in person. And we would welcome any opportunity to meet anyone and everyone in person when we are presented with the opportunity. I will move the speaking session back to Gal. And I want to say again, thank you everyone, each and every one of the 76 attendees that are coming in and are listening to this session. Appreciate your time.
Okay, thank you, Yaniv. You can actually stay right where you are as we're about to invite Matt Hurewitz, Best Buy's Associate Director of Application Security and Security Architecture, to the stage. Hi, Matt, welcome.
Hi, nice to be here.
I think we can hear you.
Okay.
Hey, Matt.
Hey, Yaniv, how are you?
I am awesome. Awesome. And I'm very, very, very happy to have you here. I'm looking forward to our discussion. Maybe, Matt, briefly, and we're going to keep this thing obviously as conversational as we can. Just introduce yourself to the audience, your role at Best Buy, things you're handling, and I'll probably take it away from there with a couple of questions.
Yeah, so I'll just start this with, I started on the engineering side of the house, so the engineering and product development side. So I'm all with like shift left, but I've spent like the last 3.5, 4 years in the cybersecurity space where security by design, so security architecture, application security, so that's our assessment capability. Previously, I started our VDP and bug bounty program, and then our CI integrated like scanning capabilities, if you will, is something that I started and continuing to grow.
Perfect. I want to say to the audience, this is actually probably the second or third time I'm speaking with Matt to audiences like this. And I think Matt is an individual, but also practically what Best Buy had done in the past couple of years around application security is unique in many different industry standards. It was very, very, and I'm saying it very openly, I was extremely surprised to see how an organization at the scale and mass of Best Buy changed and shifted application security in the way they did. This is why we're so happy to have Matt around here now to share some of the things they have learned as they've built and grew the application risk program in Best Buy. And I'll start, Matt, by asking, why is this so hard? And how hard it is to do it at the scale of Best Buy?
Yeah, so so a little bit like Best Buy, depending on how familiar you are, like we have a pretty significant perimeter. It's thousands of applications, it's thousands upon thousands of microservices, ETL jobs, things that make our operation run that you just wouldn't think. We have applications that my coworker coined lovingly that are old enough to drink, and we're using every piece of technology. And sorry, for those people that are not in the United States drinking age is 21 years old. So that's a piece of information you need to know for sure.
Or you.
Yeah. So from that perspective, it's every piece of technology, and everything we do is at a size and scale that required us to kind of build our own. So when you walk into a landscape like that, like why is that hard? Well, it's the basics you have everywhere. So like, what's your application inventory? How many hosts do you have in like in your perimeter? Things like that is really hard because over the years we've changed infrastructures. We have data centers, we have stuff in the cloud. We've acquired companies. So all of those things that you think they are just at a larger size and scale. So when somebody asks you the question, like how big is the problem? It starts off intractable. It's just like, I can guess, but how confident am I? And that's where the faith comes in, right? Because we're all still trying to operate. We're all still trying to lift our baseline and be better today than we were yesterday. But some of the basic questions we just, don't have high confidence in, or at least we didn't when, 5 years ago, 7 years ago, something to that effect.
Yeah, it's interesting. Both, I'm going to touch the faith side of application security, which I think is it grows its significance the more we move responsibility to the execution side of the house. So the holy grail of application security programs and application risk programs are to move to shift. We say shift left, I say shift to the developer. You want the developer to lead, to champion the security initiatives, but to do so, you have to have very reliable data set, which unfortunately as a market, we're not excelling in that attribute. And secondly, you really need to know what you have. And you touched something that honestly in previous discussions, I might be deviating a bit out of script, but in previous discussions came up as one of the biggest challenges, and this was creating the application inventory. This is one of the things that organizations struggle a lot. I know you had a very creative way to resolve that in Best Buy. So to the extent that you're able to share, I'm sure that the participants here in the summit would love to understand both at the scale of Best Buy, but also from the practicalities. How do you start building these basic blocks that allows you to communicate better with developers, to understand the risk that is associated to them, and eventually report back to your superiors that things are moving along in the right way?
Yeah, so there's a lot there. So let me unpack that. So for the last 10 years, as part of anybody's technology transformation, it's like, how can we become more agile? How can we release more quickly? How can we do more faster in a more flexible way? And as the kind of backdrop for like the landscape in which you're trying to do security, that's challenging. And one of the things that we say a lot is we try to unwind the we have to go as fast as possible, and we have to go as fast as responsible. And I've learned a few things, especially coming over from the engineering side. I never thought I wrote insecure code. I never thought my teams wrote insecure code. I just thought that that just wasn't something that our developers did. Our meaning like my nuclear team, the people that I was a part of. That's something that other people did. And then when I came over to the security side, I was blown away. We were all looking at the same sculptures, except as engineers, you're looking at the positive space. As security folks, you're looking at the negative space. So you're looking at the same thing, but you're seeing something completely different. And bridging that gap has come through really close relationships between assessors and engineers. They've had to demonstrate, like almost prove to me that something is vulnerable. And as you see in your tools, most tools have great, dialogue mechanisms, and one of them is propose not exploitable. And for an engineer that doesn't quite understand, almost everything looks like a P&E, right? Mm-hmm. And that leads to a conversation, and you just have to build credibility in that way. And then obviously, the vulnerability landscape, supply chain attacks most recently, if those are things that your engineers are worried about, all of a sudden they're looking to security, and then we come from a place of credibility. Once you demonstrate that you have that credibility in some way, you become a more valued partner. And I think that that's really important, given this landscape of security is just risk averse. Engineers in an agile organization are supposed to go fast, and reconciling that conundrum.
I think that one of the biggest challenges for us security people is that security is a business problem under disguise. It's under a disguise of a very, very, very technical problem. Yeah. But it's actually all business. And one of the things we're trying to do when we go out of the security realm, when we work within security teams, it's honestly, it's never easy, but it's easier because we're talking with people in the same language. When we go out of the perimeter of the security team and we start working and talking with other teams, what we see is that we're trying to talk, we're talking Chinese with English-speaking people. This is eventually what happens. And as part of that, one of the things that we have found as we worked on different risk programs is that the most important thing is to try and drive the security findings, attributes, tasks, and put them in the same line as any other task that is being done by the developer. The biggest thing is, treat vulnerabilities like you treat bugs, put them under the same SLAs, get them into the same sprints, talk and write them in the same tickets in the same way. But I think this is where, because the mass is so big, this is also how we address this. We're trying to do it through automation. And this is why the faith-based side is so important, because when you're starting to put and inject yourself into the already existing engineering processes, product management processes, you have to be extremely accurate because this trust is very easy to break. So how did you face this challenge in Best Buy? And what were the top 3 tips you're going to give to the people around here to make sure they are able to go through the same hoops you went through without all of the struggle, which I assume you had?
Yeah, so you can never forget, like it's very easy to get overwhelmed with the details of a specific vulnerability and the context that it falls in. But like our job is to manage risk, and risk is always likelihood times impact. You know what I mean? So like it's pretty simple, and you have to be able to understand and contextualize for like business decision makers, like that story, and then you can act. And then one of the things that we built up over time is through good works and close relationships, we're able to ask the question, how much time, how much developer time, how much product manager time do we really want to dedicate towards security and risk? Like, is that something that we're willing to allocate 1% of our time to from a sprint point perspective, 2%, 3%, 5%? You know, like, because that's ultimately what you're getting down to. Any time you're working on security work, you're not working on like features and functions and functionality. And so like that's what it boils down to. And you need to have the credibility, and the data is really important, because from a security perspective and a defense in depth perspective, we take a lot of steps that are redundant. Like, why do we do static when we have a WAF? You know what I mean? Like that type of stuff. And so the details of it requires people to understand that this is very much like part of your posture and your risk profile. And you just need to like, how much time are we dedicating towards this? How important is it really? And it's always a conversation. It's not just Best Buy, and I don't want to give the impression that we've 100% figured it all out, because that's not the case either. I think every organization has their own journey. But essentially it boils down to security only works if we have a lot of redundancy, and even then it only works so well. We don't tell anybody that we're secure. We tell them that we're bringing up the baseline, we're more secure than we were the day before, and these are like the things that we do, but we don't work in guarantees. And so from that perspective, it really comes down to like, how important is this in terms of like hours or dollars and cents, and what are we going to allocate towards doing that? And from a security perspective, we just have to make sure what we ask people to do is truly important. And given the great tools we have now, you can see where the risk lies. You can run scanners, you can prioritize, and you can aggregate all different types of detail, and you can tell a story, and then just make sure that you know where the most risk is. And my advice to everybody is make sure you're only spending time working on your top 3 priorities. And as you knock those out, make sure that you're reprioritizing and working them.
Before I'm going to ask my next question, just injecting here to the audience, you can feel free to ask some questions in the chat if you want. I have plenty. If there is something pressing you'd like to ask Matt or myself, I'll be very, very happy to pick these up out of the chat. I think, Matt, well, we'll see if there were some particular questions. I think that one of the most important things in an application risk program is getting engineering leadership aligned with security. And I know it's not easy. It's like something that can be very, very, very challenging. Any particular thing you think would be useful as you advocate to engineering leadership that this is something they should invest time in, and it's something that gives business value just like a feature?
Yeah, and I'll just be kind of like just very direct on this, and this isn't necessarily how I bring around my engineering partners, but we're all friends here. From that perspective, like, first of all, roles and responsibilities need to be really clear. A lot of times engineers have exposure to security, and some of them are very good. And other times, like the level of security expertise among engineers varies greatly. And so knowing what your role and responsibility is, and I think one of the things that Best Buy did really well is our security team is not part of our engineering team. So we're truly co-equal. And so we can have a healthier friction than when you report up through engineering proper. I think that that's a good start. So when you have the boundaries, that definitely helps. And honestly, I think the news helps. Like the last N number of years, I mean, pick a date, like security makes the news. And fewer and fewer people actually, especially those who don't have security in their job title or description, want to sign up for making security decisions. And so everybody wants to be secure. And I think that's a great place to be. I think that a lot of the time from an alignment perspective is done through learning. Right now, we deal a lot with, there are better security tools than there have ever been during like my career. They're more innovative, they're coming faster, and that's awesome. Though you can tell the ones that sell to engineers because they're selling secret sauce of like, bolt this onto my like CI, and if a scan comes back clean, you're secure. And between the marketing and the understanding, I think that that is an opportunity. And that's something that we deal with a lot. But I would say that demonstrating to technical people in a technical way that you're also competent and that your concerns are real is a great place to start. And then also demonstrating that you as security, like we're a true partner. And so not every decision breaks our way. We don't use hard power unless we absolutely have to. And we'll be in the trenches when they're in a war room or they're in an intense remediation, we're there and available. We get no pleasure in like finding vulnerabilities or coming down on people at Friday at 7 o'clock. You know what I mean? Like that's not what we enjoy either. And so demonstrating that you're shoulder to shoulder and you're not looking somebody in the eye and telling them and wagging a finger is like a huge, huge start. Very few of the friction or the frictional situations I've gotten into couldn't be resolved by demonstrating that we're human first, we all have the same concerns, we're all on the same side, we're all in service of the same goal, but these are real concerns, and demonstrating why and answering questions. Things that are second nature from a security perspective are non-obvious from an engineering perspective. And that doesn't mean that they're dumb or they're not good at their job. You know, it just means that it's different and we have to bridge those gaps. We're people dealing with people 99% of the time.
Yeah. You know, it's interesting. You said that security reports up to the engineering function. And you're obviously, I'm not comparing the sizes, but in Vulcan, security reports to the product organization. Sure. Which is part of the same concept of embedding what we secure in the most as a company that handles very, very, very rigid production guidelines. The biggest crown jewel we have is our production environment. And the biggest owner of the production environment next to engineering is product. What we're trying to do as well is put security up to the point where in the priorities of the business sits in the same level of fixing bugs, delivering new features, and every other thing that eventually impacts the business. So just a nuance here. Maybe my last question, Matt, would be, I'm stepping out from Vulcan CEO's seat for a moment and putting myself in any CEO seat. Because apart from being a CEO of a security company, I have a board of directors, and my board of directors asks me questions alongside, by the way, my customers, my prospects, and my partners about how do I secure my organization? What is the security? How can I assess the risk of my organization? We are obligated by regulation to report risk to the board. And one of the things we have found as a company, but also I found as a CEO, is that many times the business people, my board, and it's a cybersecurity driven board, and still find it hard to quantify and measure risk. And I think it's going to be extremely interesting for the people around here to understand from you, how do you measure this? What is the one single or two single KPIs you take and report upwards and downwards and say, this is the progress we have made, this is where we feel proud?
Yeah, so this is a really interesting question because we talk a lot about this broadly, like how do we measure risk broadly? And we have a team that's dedicated and they quantify this, and they do a really good job. But when it comes to like communication with either executives or the board, it's definitely been a journey. And so we've learned a lot from being able to, not necessarily comprehensively, that's like a different conversation, but in specific instances where we had a capability or I mean, boards read the news like regular people do. And when, you know, in our area, Target was a hot topic of discussion for a while in the security space, Equifax and whatnot. A lot of ransomware makes the news. Board members read that and then they ask, they say, hey, like, what have we done to like counteract this? Or like, is this a problem that we have also? And so we get to answer a very specific question. Typically that involves like, this is our current state. This is what we think good looks like. We want to use this as like a quantifiable measurable that we'll take an accountability on. So every month or every quarter, we can show we're making progress against the thing. And when you do that a couple times and they start to really understand, boards manage businesses, like they manage strategic, they manage the strategic aspect of businesses. They don't need to be cybersecurity experts broadly. I guess it's good if they are, or maybe bad if they are. I don't know, you tell me. But from that perspective, when you start filling in pieces that connect to tangible things that they worry about at a board level, like the conversation starts to shift from tactical to more comprehensive. And as they go along on that journey with us, we can't answer a question in that way for our company to our board in a way that's not meaningful to them. So it's really a part of a bilateral conversation. It matters what we think, but it really matters what they think when they ask, like, what is our comprehensive risk? Yeah.
Thank you. I don't want to steal the thunder from the next couple of sessions, but I will say to the attendees, we have spent endless hours on the risk quantification as a problem. We spoke with people like Matt and Matt himself, who gave us a lot of inspiration. And we're going to present something that we have done at that aspect called security posture rating, which is a way we think is very intelligent to quantify and measure risk, and also to allow yourself to take smart risk decisions in terms of your actions. But you'll have to brace yourselves for at least 1 or 2 more sessions. And I want to finish and say thank you very much, Matt, for the time and for sharing. It's always a great pleasure to talk with you, and I'm always learning things that are new to me. And I'm sure the attendees around are very appreciative to the time you have spent here. Thank you, man. I appreciate it.
My pleasure. Thanks, everybody.
Wonderful. Thank you.
Bye.
Hi, great. Thank you, Matt and Yaniv, for your time and for being exactly on time. This is what I really call taking your application security program beyond. So thank you, Matt, for this inspiring Q&A session with Yaniv. Great, so we're warming up for the next segment of the summit. I'd like to welcome Ryan Gurney, Wild Ventures CISO in residence. And as Ryan brings up his slides, I'll just take a second to mention that Ryan has a very unique perspective on cyber risk after spending multiple years running security programs from companies like Google Looker, Zendesk, Engineered, eBay, and more. So I'm very, very honored and excited to have you, Ryan.
It's great to be here. Can you hear me okay? Okay. Yeah, I'm honored to be here. It's great to hear from Matt and Yaniv on managing that program. Just a quick spew about me. So yeah, recently I was at Google. I've been at Wild Ventures for 6 months. I have an interesting perspective. I think I've been fortunate to work for a company that's been acquired, a company that's gone public, a company that's failed, and as a consultant for insecurity for 9 years, and being in the leadership seat of all of those other ones. So it's really helped me as I think about investments and also as I think about CISO leadership. Today, I want to talk a little bit about negligence, risk-taking, this concept I call the negligence bar that used to always be part of my security training at my companies, and risk management, which we've talked a little bit already today about. But I want to use and talk through a few terms, if I could. One is the concept of a victim, and that is one that is acted on and usually adversely affected by a force or an agent, or it's to be hurt, damaged, or killed because of something or someone. Now, that's not the most positive way to start a presentation, but let's start there anyways. The second term is negligence, and this is when you're careless. And the legal definition really is failure to exercise the care that a reasonably prudent person would exercise in like circumstances. So why am I sharing these? Well, I want to talk a little bit about negligence in life. And some of you may have experienced some of these. I know I have. One is perhaps leaving your kids at home while you go away, like in the movie Home Alone. You're just going to be out for a few minutes and you leave your kids. The second is it's a beautiful ski day. You come to the border and there's a lot of powder on the other side. And you know there's no controls, there's no ski patrol, there's no avalanche control. And you decide, I'm gonna hop the fence. And the third is probably something I assume all of us have done, is texting while driving, right? So part of the consideration when we do these things is, guess what? Bad happens to other people. It doesn't happen to me. It's often what comes through our mind. But taking the texting while driving experience, why do we take on this excessive risk? One might be we're misinformed. We don't know maybe that people die when they text and drive. It has happened. We face external pressures. We just got a text from our boss. Our kids are yelling at us in the back seat to go to McDonald's, whatever it may be. We're in a rush. We could pull over, but we're late already. It feels easier, more convenient to just pick up our phone and text. We've done the same thing before. There's never been an issue. We all know that past does not indicate future behavior, right? We've not known anyone personally hurt by taking this risk, and I think that's key. We don't know anybody that's been hurt. And ultimately, we underestimate the real risk, and we keep doing it. So here's an example where I believe there was an underestimation of real risk. In 2014, Sony Pictures was about to release the movie, The Interview, which is about a North Korean leader who gets killed at the end of the movie. We all know who that probably is. Fortune magazine did actually an amazing retrospective on this incident that you can read about online. But a few quotes before the movie came out that were interesting. It said the movie's doing something that was bold, right? Taking on subject matter of notoriety. This is fun with a dash of smarts. And then Seth Rogen had said, people don't usually want to kill me for one of my movies until after they paid $12 for it. So there was kind of some lightweight humor going on, some joking, but behind the scenes, there was some concern. And what happened in November of 2014? Well, Sony Pictures was attacked, and some argue it was North Korea, some argue it wasn't. But regardless, it was very impactful to them. In some cases, some people have said it sent them back to the Stone Ages. They were doing things by fax machines, writing notes to each other. Everything was handwritten. Lots of their machines were wiped, and data got leaked that was then periodically leaked over the weeks ahead. And so Sony Pictures victim, from the definition, I would say, yes, they were a victim. And you can see some of these quotes. And I would often tell my team when I gave training and to leadership, I would say, if we are attacked by a nation state who is persistent and patient, can we withstand that? And I'm not sure too many companies can. And so I have I knew some people at Sony as well. And so I have some feelings towards them and how difficult this must have been. And if you are in security and you've dealt with an incident, you know how this can be. However, you can also be a bit negligent, right? And I'm not saying they were, but there were some quotes. One was, the fact that it's a nation state and is hard to defeat doesn't mean you have to leave the doors wide open and put out the welcome mat. And they made a decision allegedly a while before this incident that they weren't going to invest some money in whatever reason to save $1 million loss. And from a financial perspective, that seems like a perfectly viable explanation, but they may have miscalculated what the loss could be, right? And that $10 million invested in a different way might have really helped. But I'm not the person to say. So what does all this talk of texting while driving and thinking of the Sony have to do with anything? Why should you care? Why should I care? You have to hustle when you're in that security leadership seat. And that's what I want to share today, because you are ultimately on the clock. And when I was between jobs or thinking about taking a new position, one of the considerations I had to have was, I'm going to have to go into this company and I realize I'm not going to know everything that's going on and I have to hustle. And this is a picture from the NFL draft, where in the first round, each team has 10 minutes to pick their first selection, right? You miss that 10 minutes, you get bypassed. And that is critical to the success of a team. And my kids would come into my office on weekends in the first year, especially, and say, "Why are you working?" And I'm like, "Because I'm on the clock." And so why was that a priority? Well, priority one is what? I want to avoid being the data breach cover story of the news of the day. We read about all of these. Matt indicated some, Equifax, Target. I want to hustle as hard as I can to ensure that we don't make the news. Now, we all know it's not security's fault necessarily if you make the news, but I'm going to do everything in my power to not make the news. Okay. Now, priority two is if I make the news, I want to make sure that I'm perceived more as a victim and not negligent. And that keys into why you have to hustle. Because if I'm not hustling and I'm not getting people on board on the things we need to be doing that are key risks, then the media might portray me in a different way. And I don't want that. So I have this concept of the negligent bar. And I would share this in our awareness training with folks. And I'd say we have unreasonable risk as we've started down this journey that we have to uncover. And I need everyone to help me uncover that. It's not just me and tools. I need help. Tell me where the bodies are buried. Ultimately, our customers have expectations, as does the media, as does the public, that we meet a certain level of reasonable security. And we have to do that to get above that negligent bar from a viewpoint standpoint. And that can change and will change and is dependent on your industry that you're in as well and the kind of data you're gathering, right? But what did Sony teach us? Sony taught us also that the security basics matter. And often it's a lot of those that get you above that bar, right? 2FA password managers. How important and critical is that on your email and on your administrative access and sharing with people how to do strong passwords? It's still the world we live in. Encryption with proper key management. Maybe it doesn't necessarily stop the Sony hack, but maybe it slows it down. Malware protection. Yeah, signature-based stuff can be gone around, and we saw in some of those quotes, but today there's such better behavioral-based stuff. Matt indicated too that the tools are only getting better. They definitely are. Security monitoring. Got to be able to monitor what your people are doing, also the threats that are hitting your infrastructure, but also, is there bad actors that are trying to exfiltrate data out? Are we seeing troves of data go leaking out? And then training. We're not here to make everybody a security expert, but there's a certain level that we should expect, and it builds that culture and allows people to indicate risks and be comfortable sharing them with the security team. And ultimately, you wrap all that around third-party assessments and audits. It's why you do it. Don't believe me, believe all the things that are saying that we're doing it right. And if you do these things, and there's more, certainly, you can build a framework. You can use, for example, the CIS top security controls, which really are focused on areas you could get breached at. But if you do those basic things, the basics still matter and will likely get you above that bar. Now, you don't aspire to be a victim. We don't ever aspire to be a victim, but we got to avoid negligence. The second thing is you got to avoid being the lowest common denominator. And recently, I had a conversation with an entrepreneur, and we were talking about turning on WAF and turning on guard duty in AWS. And now customers might turn that on, and instantly they see all these attacks. And they go, oh, is my infrastructure misconfigured? Am I under attack? Is the tool broken? Well, no, you're just swimming in the internet of muddy water, right? The vast majority of time, attackers are opportunists. They're just probing for targets. This is the reality of it. The more tooling you have, the more understanding you're going to have that you are getting hit by these. Usually, you are not an unprobed targeted target, which means you are not predestined to be a target, usually. To attackers, you just can't leave the door open. So if you leave it open a crack, all of a sudden you're going to get a ton of discovery on you. And all of a sudden you are a target, right? Close those cracks. However, you can be a target depending on poking the bear, right? And Sony likely poked the bear. And so you have to, as part of risk assessment, we talk about technology risk assessment needs to go broader than that. You need to think about the culture of your company externally. How do people view your company? And this is all very key, these lists of when you're thinking about if you're going to move jobs, when you're evaluating what company to go to. You need to look at these things because it's going to impact your security role and the threats you face. But culture, industry, government, law enforcement, you might get more people interested in you. Products, what kind of products you sell? Are you selling a product that monitors people's behavior? Might get more people interested in you, in attacking you. Data gathered. What kind of data are you gathering on people? What do you have? I was asked to interview for a company that does DNA stuff. I wasn't interested in that. I'm not sure I wanted the pressure of being responsible for DNA data and securing it. Customers, who are your customers? Early on in one of the companies I was at, a vast majority of our customers were adult sites, crypto companies, gaming companies. They attract a certain type of hacker. And then how does your company do community interaction, activism? How are your executives talking about? What are they interested in on social media? All plays into, are the bees attracted to the honey, right? And so I'm not here to say you should be one way or the other, whether you should be Sheriff of Nottingham or Robin Hood. I think in different levels, your company is going to vary in that regard. But as a security professional, your team has to understand the risk with that. And Sony had interactions on that. They probably needed to heighten their controls based on what could have happened, based on how they were being perceived, right? So you get all this. So are we good? Is this the end of the presentation? Well, no. We've sort of also created a bit of a monster, right? And that monster has to do with every time there's a public data breach, yes, it raises awareness and people get interested in security, but it also raises rigor. It raises regulation. People get called to Congress. We get a lot more conversations about it, and people get very nervous. And part of it means that they sometimes change away from what security things are reasonable and matter into areas that go well beyond that. And an example of that might be these shoes, right? And if you recognize these shoes, these are Roger Reed's shoes, the famous shoe bomber. And these are from the FBI's picture of those shoes that's on their website. Well, quite a few years ago, he tried to blow up a plane by lighting his shoes on fire that had a compound in it that could have caused some destruction. He wasn't successful. 5 years after he did that, the TSA made the requirement that everybody had to take their shoes off when they went through security, right? And that seems like a small thing and an annoyance. And sure, I want to do that for the security of all my fellow passengers. But if you add up the total of that and the time and the annoyance, and is that really managing the root cause, it's a lot of time and effort and annoyance. And similarly, what we've done in the security world is we've gone to each other, and this is a slightly different topic, but we've ended up playing company risk assessment pong with each other. when it comes down to, are you secure or not? And in a TPRM vendor risk management space. So you'll have one customer that says, hey, to a vendor, I want assurance that you'll stay out of the news and keep my data safe, right? And how do I do that? Well, I'm going to throw the book at you, and I'm going to throw a huge questionnaire. I'm going to redline a contract. I'm going to request a meeting, all this stuff. And it causes a lot of time and effort. And it only gets worse as we see more companies not meeting the negligent bar. I think if we all met it, maybe this is a different world. What's fascinating about this, especially in the SaaS world, as me being a CISO there, is when you're a vendor, sometimes now you switch and now you become the customer to that vendor. And what happens? We do it all over again to each other. And ultimately, hey, I might have sent somebody just the things I care about. And whoa, now I'm getting back a 700 questionnaire when they're on the other side of the fence. What's going on? I once had this happen. We had this long conversation. We were getting it totally drawn out. And I just emailed the CISO. I said, can we just get legal and sales off the call? Let's just the two of us get in a room or on a phone call and just talk about real risk. And ultimately, that helped. And we had a great conversation. And we were able to boil it down to what mattered. Now, here's an example of where this has changed the world to us. And the problem is we don't have context on risk in the companies we do business with. So we get the book thrown at each other. We're not transparent on risk. We don't always have a risk-based program that we can share. And so here are some of the actual customer contractual requests I've received through the years. I have a little black book of them that I like to keep. And I pulled out a few. I won't go through all of these. But the themes of these, I'll say, are words such as you must do something immediately, which is not auditable and defensible, very hard. You must pre-authorize access when we're the caretakers, custodians of your data, and we're running a cloud business. How do we do that? I want to look at all the background checks and pre-approve people that have access to our data. Really hard. And the bottom one where it says, you must remediate all known vulnerabilities within 24 hours. All known. I don't care what the severity is. And it proves out something, right? We're doing this to each other. We're messing each other up. What's missing? Well, risk-based transparency. So in absence of a risk-based, transparent, auditable program, your security program becomes the most stringent of all your customers, right? And you live by the world of what they state to you. And again, we do it to each other. I may be like, wow, I can't believe this person's asked me to do this. And then on the same breath, I'll go ask a vendor to do the exact same thing when I think it's unreasonable. And so it's a silly world that we live in. I had this conversation with legal at a number of the companies I was at. I said, I never want to get into a position where the customer owns my security program, especially in a multi-tenant environment, because it's nearly impossible. It has to be a risk-based approach, and I have to defend it that way. And there has to be a level of trust, but I have to be transparent on how I'm doing it. And so I'll take the example here, just in conclusion, of the risk-based response. And this is just I have a screen here of Vulcan, just as an example. A lot of tools do risk management for you, but taking the remediate all known vulnerabilities within 24 hours. Well, I don't want to agree to that. What I'm more comfortable agreeing with, and it's lengthy, but I'm just going to highlight it, is, you know what we really do and what's more impactful is I review we scan continuously. We risk, rank, review, and correlate all findings. We bring in context of where those environments exist. We group them because in reality, 3 low findings might actually be a critical, and it might need to be all hands on deck. And that's the kind of program I want to demonstrate to my customers that I'm running, not a blanket statement. So in summary, get it and stay above the negligent bar, and then encourage your peers to do the same thing. We all have to help each other if we want to improve the industry, and the basics do matter. force probes to look elsewhere, right? Harden your shell, harden your outside, make sure that they're going and attacking somebody else. And if we all do this, maybe the probes will eventually go away. Be in front of business decisions that may alter your threat landscape. We talked about that. This is important, and this is why you go meet with business unit leaders. You go get their perspective on, hey, how can I help you? But B, what's coming down the pipe? Like, where should we be worried? This is really key for us when Zendesk went public, is getting in advance notice that that was happening, because we put in some controls before that date. So things like our website wouldn't be hacked and taken down. We put in additional controls in case bad actors wanted to do things to embarrass us. Build out a transparent, risk-based, defensible security program that you can be proud of and that you can share with your customers. And then finally, like, be reasonable with each other, right? If something you're being asked to do is ridiculous, don't ask somebody else to do it because it's ridiculous. Like, let's be fair, and let's chase what matters using a risk-based approach. And so that's what I had, and hopefully that helps you in your sphere of influence. Thank you.
Thank you, Ryan, for that peek into the reality of cybersecurity responsibility. We appreciate your attendance. Great. So now we're going to transition to the Remediation Summit product sessions that are led by our product and research teams. Please welcome our next speaker, David Gruberger from the Vulcan Cyber Product Management.
Thank you for the introduction, Gal. My name is David Gruberger, and I'm a product manager at Vulcan Cyber. And in our team, we've been thinking a lot on how to introduce new modern ways of measuring cyber risk. And we're going to talk about an innovative way to measure your overall security posture. That's something that we've been working for a few months now. So we start with the problem. How are you measuring security posture today? As the number of vulnerabilities grow, companies need more context to make sure that they are vulnerable, and of course to know that they are complying with the policies and the regulations. And today's organizations don't accurately measure their progress. Now, we are going to talk about how Vulcan can help with this problem and the overall process of discovering and building a security posture strategy. Now, in order to build a strategy, companies need to discover. And discovering means integrate all of your vulnerability data. That's the proposal of Vulcan Cyber, to bring all of the host, apps, and cloud in one tool. Get, of course, an accurate IT asset inventory. And that's, again, something that we do. We will merge all of this information together and define, of course, business impact of your assets. So after you have all of this picture together, then on the assessment phase, Vulcan will help you map your attack surface, understand your cyber risk, what are the business and what are the context of business and threat intelligence. So CVSS is actually, it's talking about the vulnerability itself, and Vulcan will bring the context to build a risk picture for each one of the vulnerabilities that are affecting the assets in your organization. Now, on the prioritization, well, after you have all of the data, all of the risk calculated according to your, and we'll see that on the next slide, according to your organization policy, then we, of course, we prioritize and fix, remediate all of the high-risk mitigation actions, and of course, avoiding a lot of busy work fixing low-risk issues or issues that are not important according to your policy and your risk acceptance. Now, with the number of vulnerabilities growing exponentially, automation is key for a successful vulnerability program and, of course, a security program in general. So Vulcan will help you build those playbooks and integration with your ticketing systems and communication tools, and align security teams with the people that are actually responsible for the fixes, and all of the way. One of the most important things that we believe nowadays, programs and software that measure only the traditional risk and track only risk as a KPI, track all of this process is not something that is being done in a way that you can see, okay, you know, after some time we made this progress. So risk is always there, it's always coming in, and many times it's just something that doesn't represent the progress of your security program. Now, when we say define your security policy, we actually say that we give you tools for that. Now, Vulcan will give you tools that you need to comply with security policy. You can define risk and risk impact, and we'll see that on our demo. And you can also define security posture risk threshold. We'll talk about what's the security posture. So when you can add context and say, okay, that's my acceptance of risk, then you're actually saying, well, I am effectively tracking my progress. Now, in Vulcan, you can go to your settings, and an admin can define your global SLAs, set a time frame for each SLA, meaning that criticals, highs, mediums, and lows can have different SLAs, and we'll also measure the breaching of those SLAs. So if your program is directed to SLAs, so we have an answer for you. You can define your risk priority weights, meaning you can personalize your how you measure risk for your company, adding business context, adding maintaining technical severity, which is the CVSS, bringing threat intelligence into this score, and also tags in this sense here. Those are business tags, meaning you can actually define if an asset is part of a high impact business tag or not, and then this will increase the score for that asset in general. Now, after you have the risk, and we are of course not, we are not abandoning the risk. We still are all about risk. We're just saying that you still need to say what is my acceptance of risk for my organization. So we allow you to define from a risk from 0 to 100, what is the overall risk threshold that you accept. So this is something that will, change from company to company. And of course, you'd usually define this according to which vulnerabilities you want to have, you want to fix by the end of the day. So we introduced the security posture rating, the SPR. SPR is exactly what we talked before. So when you define a threshold, then it's the percentage of assets that comply with certain risk threshold predefined by each organization. We actually also plan to allow aggregation, so every customer has a kind of context of what are the Vulcan community SPR. So this is probably something we can talk on the next chapters of on the next summit. Now, why SPR? You know, so while SPR is talking about progress, KPI that you can present to your executives, something you can actually understand and say, okay, those are my assets. This is percentage of assets within my organization that comply with our policies. And on the other hand, you have a traditional risk calculation. Now, risk calculation is important, but when you aggregate the risk, you actually come with few problems that it's very difficult to move your risk. Now, vulnerabilities are always coming in. You're always in the fixes, and when you aggregate risk, you may not always understand changes. Why did something change on my risk? So I actually will give you an example about you know, an organization with 3 assets. So asset 1 has a maximum risk of 90. This is the overall asset 1 risk. Asset 2 has a maximum risk of 95. And it's not, those are not complying with the SPR. They all have above 70. Now, asset 3 is all equal or below 70, and I have an average traditional risk calculation of 72.7, while I am complying only on 33% level on the SPR, on the security posture rating level. So what happens is that one of our engineers woke up in the morning and fixed some risks. He fixed all of the risks on asset 1. On the way, he also fixed one of the vulnerabilities on asset 3, no fixes on asset 2. And what happens? Well, my risk actually increased. So my KPI for risk is actually going up while I actually fixed risk for my organization. So this KPI doesn't really show progress. Now, while this KPI didn't show progress, well, I have SPR showing an increase from 33% to 67%, and we changed compliance for one of the assets, and our security posture policy increased. Now, we're going back to the demo, and we are going to see how SPR can be used. So first of all, SPR is our main highlighted KPI in the system. We measure it for each one, for all of the organization or for each one of the business groups. We also actually allow you to remediate by SPR, meaning you can also choose which fixes are highest impact. So you can come here and say, oh, this SPR, this fix here is going to improve my SPR by 13%. Well, this is a very important feature that gives you a very important prioritization feature. This is something that we want and we will leverage in Vulcan on the next months, and it allows our users to find fixes that make the highest impact for the organization. Now, of course, on the other hand, we can also allow you to understand SPR on the analytics level and understand the progress for the SPR during time. And of course, something that is interesting, we allow you to compare risk with the SPR, with our security posture rating, so that we sum up all of the risk for a specific business group, and you can compare if, for example, here I have a Linux team with 90% compliance for SPR, but still a lot of risk compared to other business groups. This is something important when you may want to understand risk, of the limits of this KPI, of the security posture rating. Now, going back to the benefits, SPR, and summarizing our session, SPR will help you prioritize and fix the most impactful vulnerabilities. This is something very important. We'll also help you track vulnerability management progress towards strategic goals. We will, when you achieve maturity and you want to change, you can still scale your security program and change SPR thresholds, and then, of course, deliver KPIs that everybody can understand. Thank you very much, and thank you for joining our session today.
Thank you, David. SPR is indeed a game changer. As a reminder, you guys, if you have any questions or you want to speak to our speakers, please do so via the chat or the Q&A function. I'm seeing a lot of interesting questions, so feel free to join the conversation and ask more. I'm now pleased to welcome the next speaker, Yonatan Amitay, Vulcan Cyber research team.
Gal, thank you for the introduction. So yeah, I'm Yonatan Amitay. I'm a security researcher at Vulcan Cyber. Really excited to be here, and I want to thank you all for joining me. Hope we'll have some fun together talking about dealing with Windows advisories and essentially fixing Windows vulnerabilities. Before we start, I just want to say that, yeah, patching Windows vulnerabilities could sound a bit boring. It's definitely not the sexiest topic at the cybersecurity industry, but I personally believe that we as a team and Vulcan as a company could step in where nobody else really wants to and give an excellent value to our customers and to the community. And so, yeah, as we all know, there is an old and pretty beautiful love story between Windows and hackers. Hackers love hacking Windows. I don't know if Windows love them back, but let's assume they do. Windows is the vendor with the most vulnerabilities out there, and it's still the most used desktop environment operation system, especially in enterprises. So it's pretty obvious why hackers love to hack Windows. Besides that, that is not an open source, but this is for another talk. So today's agenda, Windows updates, what are they? Why are they so annoying? It sounds funny, but they do. The difficulty of suggesting the right fix to the vulnerability, our research and KPIs, a peek to behind the scenes, the outcomes, and roadmap and future plans, obviously. So I want to discuss some terms in the Windows patching world before we begin. So Patch Tuesday, as I said, Microsoft is the vendor with the largest amount of vulnerabilities out there, and there are new ones released very often, so almost in a daily basis. So they decided to release their security updates in a monthly basis, except some urgent patches, which they refer as advisors, as we can see here with the initial ADV, which contain workarounds and special instructions. I want to talk about KB. KB is a knowledge base which contains more information about the individual bulletin, including workarounds, known issues, and so on. But it's really important to talk about KBs because patching systems like SSEM refer remedy as KBs. So when you try to patch something at SSEM, you need to to refer it as KB with the ID is like the social security number of the fix, essentially. So let's move on. Why Windows updates are so annoying? It's funny. The Windows updates fail too often from a wide variety of reasons. You're missing prerequisite. It's not the right product. The fix is no more available. There's a newer one that replaced it, and so on. I tell you a short story where, as part of my research, I reached tried to consult with some security engineer for my personal network, and I found a vulnerability manager that his work is to patch Windows systems to the customers, and he said that you can never know what's going to happen when you try to patch a Windows product. It's a lot of trial and error and frustration. So I realized there's a big problem here that we can try and mitigate and solve eventually. There's a data inconsistency. You can get updates on security updates from several sources, like Microsoft CVRF, which is a file that contains all the updates and some basic information. You have the Microsoft website, of course, and you have the Microsoft Security Update Catalog when you can download some KBs and so on. And there's the complexity. I like to say too many is like a lot of connections, which make the complexity big, or like for each Microsoft security advisory, there's a lot of KB, fixing a lot of Microsoft product, on fixing a lot of vulnerabilities, and this connection make our life difficult to try and match the patch to the vulnerability. So suggesting the right KB, the difficulties, scanners wrap Windows vulnerabilities differently, as we can see in this example. Rapid making a vulnerability for each CVE released. In this example, print spooler vulnerability. Qualys is making vulnerability for every patch Tuesday. And here it's July 2020, which is the same as which contained the print spooler vulnerability. I'll show you Rapid. It's all the same vulnerability. And in Tenable, Tenable is making a vulnerability for each KB, as we can see here. So when matching data-wise, when matching fix to the vulnerability, it could be a struggle because scanners do it differently and refer the vulnerability differently. So it makes our life a bit harder, which is good. We like to work hard. So our research and KPIs. We first of all tried to find the direct fix for each vulnerability on every Windows product version. Let me explain that. There's vulnerability that came out at July 2020, and Microsoft released a fix, and we matched that fix to the vulnerability. So July 2020 was over a year ago. There was newer patches. So right now, not always the fix will not always work, and there's been new fixes connected to the vulnerability because they're fixing it too. So our first initial mission was to match the fix with the vulnerability, the original fix that came out to fix the vulnerability. We want to match it directly. We did it by reference. the KB. We try to find the KB in the vulnerability by CVE and vendor match. We want to see that the solution covers all the CVE of the vulnerability, plus it's the same vendor and product. And we try some text similarities methods to try and match it. We try to find the newest one by Supercedence recursion. Let's talk about Supercedence. When a KB when a Microsoft fix replaces an older fix, it becomes his Supercedence. So what we try to do is to go to the direct KB, as we found in July 2020, and try to see who switched it and go all the way up to the latest one. We failed to do it. We struggled really hard, and we didn't give up yet. We gonna try and do it again, but we failed because the data inconsistency, and there's a lot of branches in the tree that led to nowhere. So that's for another talk. And find for each Microsoft product the newest fix available, which was by far the most effective way. We calculate through our data for each product and sub-product. Product is also a complicated thing in Windows. For instance, there's Microsoft Word, and there's Microsoft Word for Windows X, and Microsoft Word Y for Windows X and Y and Z. So it gets really complex, and we found the newest fix for each Microsoft product, and then we try to connect the vulnerability with the original fix and the newest fix we know. Hope that makes sense. So it sounds pretty simple, but behind the scene, it wasn't. We had a lot of trial and error. The devil is in the details, they say. It's really true in this case. It was, we thought we cracked it, and then we found another problem, and we went back, and then we thought we cracked it again when we came back, but we learned a lot from it, and we have still a lot to learn to master it. So the outcome, I'm really excited to show you that for the vulnerability I shared, we are suggesting the direct KB product match, as we can see here. For in this example, is tenable. The KB 458630 of 2020 November. We are suggesting as a fix the direct one with Vulcan fix rating with a tag of direct KB product match that you as a customer and a Vulcan platform user can know that this is the direct fix that originally came out to fix this vulnerability. And this is the second part, the newest KB product match. I screenshot it in October, so excuse me. And so it was the October 2021. It was the newest fix for this product. So we're suggesting it to in our platform as the fix that will have the highest probability of work on and fixing lots of other vulnerabilities as well. Yes, so roadmap and future plans. We have a lot of we want to do, but we'll start with make it as a widget in Remedy Cloud. I think make it as a free widget. We can help the community and let the community help us by giving us feedback, and we try to solve it together. Because as I said, the devil is in the details here. So beside data and research, I think the more set of eyes testing it and trying it will be the easiest for us to master it eventually and learn from it. And we want to validate KBs in the SSCM. We'll create a lab with different Windows products and environments and try to patch them automatically and verify if they work, if they fail, and notify the user if it breaks something. I think it's really important based off the research I've done and the people I talk with. So I just want to thank you for attending my session. I'll be available at the event chat to answer any question, and feedbacks are more than welcome. Back to you, Gal. Thank you, everyone. Thank you.
Thank you, Yonatan. Okay, coming up next, I want to welcome our next speaker, Ilan Spector from the Vulcan Cyber Product Management Team.
All right, thank you so much, Gal, and hi, everyone. It's a pleasure to see you all here. My name is Ilan Spector. I'm a product manager here at Vulcan, and I'm in charge of the whole AppSec aspects of the product here at Vulcan. And today I want to discuss the way we manage and prioritize our application security vulnerabilities. And let me just start my screen sharing here. All right. So many of you know that application security is a growing field. This is something that has become more and more relevant definitely over the last few years with the whole COVID-19 situation, but this is becoming a bigger and bigger chunk of our security program management. And today I want to discuss how we're approaching this and offer a bit more of a modern approach on how to make sense and how to prioritize between all the noise and all the different tools that we have in this space, and how to really get something that's actionable and that our teams can now work on. What are they working on next week, and get a good answer to that. So as I said, today, the world of AppSec is pretty complex. There are a lot of tools out there, and some of you may be using some of the tools, or maybe some are using more and some are using less, but we all have our our SAST and our DAST and our SCA and our penetration testing and bug bounties, and we've got these sources just coming in, pouring in vulnerabilities. We're becoming pretty good at scanning for these vulnerabilities, but at the end of the day, we have Michael, who is the risk manager at Dunder Mifflin, and he needs to know what to do with all this information that's pouring into to his program, right? He's the risk manager, and he needs to do something about all these findings. So what we just saw now, the multitude of sources and tools that we're all using really creates, on the one hand, we know that we can pretty much catch a lot of the vulnerabilities that are out there and that are affecting our business. But on the other hand, and this is kind of a screenshot from Vulcan that shows how much noise and how much how much information we're getting that we need to be able to act upon. So in this example, we've got a few sources. We have our Black Duck and our checkmarks and Fortify, and we've got all these tools that are bringing in vulnerabilities. But at the end of the day, we have 2,100 vulnerabilities here, and this is These are what we call unique vulnerabilities. That means that these can be sitting on a few different assets. So we could be looking at tens of thousands, and if you have a much bigger business, then hundreds of thousands or even millions vulnerabilities. And somehow we need to prioritize these and take action upon these. So we conducted a survey, kind of a research with Pulse, and we asked vulnerability managers, what do you look at when you prioritize your vulnerabilities? And the majority of them said, 71% said that they still go by CVSS, CVSS alone, which is how things have been done, in the past, and a lot of organizations still prioritize solely on that. But what's interesting to see is that there are other parameters that are being used when prioritizing, such as the scanner scoring, the OWASP top 10, and what's even more interesting is that more and more companies are looking at more than just one parameter here. So we have 77% of respondents who use at least two of these in order to prioritize their application security findings or vulnerabilities. So another thing that we use to prioritize, or a few things that we use or that we should be using to prioritize, we would want to use these to prioritize, are compliance and regulation. If we have to be, if we need to be compliant by HIPAA or PCI, then we need to be able to put that into our model, into our vulnerability program. We have the risk score, which you got a glimpse at on the severity part of it, the CVSS. But of course, we can define risk to be something a bit more robust. We can have a look at the threat feed that goes into that, and at the business impact that that specific asset has within our business. We want to maybe be able to prioritize by SLAs. We've got a few, some of our customers, they say to us, we don't even care how severe the vulnerability is. We get measured by, are we within SLA? We don't want to exceed our SLA. That's what they care about. So that's something that we have to be able to take into consideration, as we saw before, OWASP top 10 and the business context, right? The organization unit within the company, because not all units are born equal, and some business units are more important or more sensitive than others, and we want to be able to prioritize accordingly. So all this really brings us down to the fact that we have a lot of incoming vulnerabilities. We have a lot of good scanning tools that give us the vulnerabilities, and we want to be able to prioritize them according to our business needs. But this is very, very, very difficult. And what I want to suggest is kind of looking at this whole process as a kind of funnel, right? So once we get this funnel correct, or according to our business needs, life becomes easy, or much easier. So at the top of the funnel, we have everything that we saw before. We have all our tools, all our scanning tools, all our sources, everything flowing in. We have those thousands or tens of thousands or millions of vulnerabilities coming in. And now we want to start narrowing those down so that we know what our team needs to be working on. So first things first, we want to weed out those low and medium severity vulnerabilities. We want to only focus on, for example, critical and high. And by the way, I'm going to be showing this funnel and how it really works in a few minutes in a demo. So just kind of keep that in mind when we're going over this. We have our critical and highs. Then within the unit, right? Remember Michael that we discussed before from Dunder Mifflin. He wants to focus mainly on the warehouse and the accounting sections of his business. That's what he has decided that is most important to him, and these are the people who are affected by that. And then, of course, we want to only focus on vulnerabilities that are breaching SLA. And of course, this is just a specific use case. You could say we want to focus only on vulnerabilities that are about to breach SLA, the closest ones to be breaching SLA. We also want to focus only on the OWASP top 10, or vulnerabilities that are included in the OWASP top 10. And at the end of the day, what we end up getting will be a much, much smaller number of vulnerabilities that we can just hand off to our team and say to them, here guys, this is what you'll be working on for the next week or so. And this is where we're really, really trying to aim. So without further ado, I'd like to show a demo. Whoops, sorry about that. So let me just stop sharing for a second here and hop over to our demo. All right, so let me just quickly share my screen again for the demo. Here we go. All right, so this is Vulcan. This is the Vulcan platform. Some of you may know it. But just in case you don't, just a quick overview of what we have in here. So we can see that we have 500 vulnerabilities. These, again, are what we call unique vulnerabilities. That means that we have 500 vulnerabilities that could be sitting on more than one asset. So potentially we have thousands of vulnerabilities. Here, for example, this cross-site scripting is on 47 websites, 47 assets. Where are we getting all this data from? So we have these connectors, again, this is a demo environment for Dunder Mifflin. And we have checkmarks and Fortify. We have our SAST and DAST and our SNCC for SCA. And we have our bounties. And of course, we're also connected to ticketing and ways of conveying the team's tasks. So we have our Slack and Jira. Going back to our vulnerabilities. So again, small environment, we have only a few thousand vulnerabilities. Of course, this can be tens of thousands or even hundreds or millions of vulnerabilities. What I want to show you now is really go over that funnel that I showed in the deck and try and see how we can get these 500 narrowed down to something that's more actionable. And the way to do that is to create filters. So I'll show one example of a filter just to kind of show you how we do it in Vulcan. And then I have a saved filtering that I'll use to save a bit of time. By the way, something that I did want to show is that even within connectors, we have things that can help us prioritize. For example, within checkmarks, we can select which result states to take, right? And that way we can avoid false positives that are in checkmarks. So if you, within checkmarks, for example, define something to be not exploitable, you can say, okay, Vulcan, please don't bring these into the environment because that's just not relevant for me. That's just because as a side note. But back to narrowing down, we want to create that funnel and we want to be able to say, everything that has a risk level of critical and high, just as a quick example. And now we've already narrowed down from 500 to 200, and we can see that we only have the ones that are really, really, critical and high. And now just to save some time, so we're going to go through, I'm going to show you a saved search that I've already done called Dunder Mifflin AppSec program. And that's basically just, bringing out those vulnerabilities that we discussed. I see that I left out the critical ones, so let me do that. All right, so now that we've narrowed it down based on what we discussed in our in our overview, we can see that we're now only looking at the accounting and warehouse teams. We're only looking at high and critical vulnerabilities, only vulnerabilities that are breaching SLA, and only vulnerabilities that are in the OWASP top 10. So just as a quick reminder to go back to our funnel here, we had all our 500 here. We had our critical and highs, narrowed down. Then we only wanted warehouse and accounting, breaching SLA, OWASP top 10, and then we see what we get, which is 23 vulnerabilities. This is a much more convenient and bite-sized way of taking action. And now what we can do is, now that we've narrowed all of these down, we know that these are the ones we want to focus on. These are the ones we want our team to, if it's our DevOps or IT teams or engineering teams to work on, we can say, okay, these are the 5 ones that we want to focus on now. And let's create an email campaign or a Slack campaign or a Jira ticket or Jira tickets. And that is where, that is kind of the modern approach of how to really make the most of your AppSec program and focus on what really, really matters for your business. That's about it from me. Thank you so much for being here with me. I appreciate it. And Gal, back to you, and enjoy the rest of your summit.
Thank you, Ilan. Okay, great. For our final speaker of the day, please welcome Yossi Glazer, also part of the Vulcan Cyber product management team. Hi, Yossi.
Hello, everyone, and thanks for the introduction, Gal. Since I'm on the closing session today, I'll try to make it short and sweet. So in this session, I want to give you an additional perspective that could help you to better assess your vulnerability risks and prioritize them by looking from the viewpoint of potential attackers. Let me share my screen. Okay. So as a background, I will briefly mention some additional findings from the survey that Ilan mentioned before. Pulse and the Vulcan Cyber surveyed among security decision makers to find out how vulnerability risk is prioritized, managed, and reduced. According to this new research, security teams are not doing enough today to correlate the vulnerability data with actual business risks. And most VM programs are processing the risks inside that they need, and they can't effectively protect against valuable business assets. So in this session, I want to examine with you how to leverage available data that we all might have or have access to improve your prioritization by focusing on threat intelligence and asset relevance data to gain some more perspective from an attacker viewpoint. So if we try to get into the mind of an attacker, what would we be looking for? So first, a good weapon that we can use. So in our field, that weapon would be to find a good exploit that we are able to use, or at least try to, assuming our target is not already protected against this kind of weapon. The second thing we might look for is an easy target, something we could potentially reach easily. And the most accessible targets are all our public-facing assets, which are all the assets that can be reached directly on the internet. Sure, the attacker might be interested in getting deeper, but he will have to find some kind of a door first. And sometimes when a door is already open or without a lock, and in our case, a patch, it just calls out to be accessed. So what are those exploits? An exploit is a piece of software, a chunk of data, or a sequence of command that takes advantage of a bug or a vulnerability in an application or a system to cause an unintended or unanticipated behavior to occur. There are several methods today that we use to classify exploits. The most common is to classify them by how the exploit communicates. So we classify a group of exploit as a remote exploit that works over a network and exploits the security vulnerability without any prior access to the vulnerable system. As you might guess, that would be the easiest or the first exploit that an attacker might look for. While a local exploits, these are another group of exploits that require prior access to the vulnerability system, to the vulnerable system, and usually will increase the privilege of the person running the exploits past those granted by the system administrator. Some famous examples of exploits are the WannaCry ransomware, which was a crypto worm which exploited the Eternal Blue vulnerability. Eternal Blue was stolen and leaked by a group called the Shadow Brokers a few months prior to the attack. While Eternal Blue was quickly patched, much of WannaCry's success was due to organizations which were not patching or using older Windows systems. Exploits are often published in various specializing exploit sites on the internet, which collects this kind of information. The published exploit will usually have an explanation on the mechanism and sometimes proof of concept or a toolkit to be used. Once the exploits are published, it makes it even easier to use them, unless the potential targets are already patched. This makes it critical to address and patch the vulnerabilities which have been published. The more sources that you find on an exploit or the more data you find that exists, the risks of someone using that exploit would be higher or using that vulnerability. So it is also advised to include this in the risk score and identify the number of exploit sources that exist and run over their publishing dates, as it's more relevant as the time goes by. In the Vulcan platform, the exploit data is already embedded in the risk score of the vulnerability, and the weight of that can also be adjusted. To look for vulnerabilities with exploits, you can look for threat tags. Let me show you an example. You can look for threats and look for the exploitable tag. Let's go inside of a vulnerability. And you can see that this vulnerability is tagged as exploitable. And in the vulnerability data itself, you can see the field exploits, which contains all of the exploits that we found that were published relating to that vulnerability. So for example, let's take one of the sources from exploit.db, and we can find that we see that proof of concept code of that exploit. You can see who was the author, the publishing date, the type of exploit, denial of service, and the platform it's being used against. All of this data is very interesting, and you can review it. And based on that and the amount of exploit, you can also understand the risks that this exploit is posing on your system. So this was one way that you can look for exploit in Vulcan or in your systems. As you can see, there are many sites and tools you can find, look and find exploits in. However, not all of the sources have the same credibility, and there is a big difference whether the reported exploit is a theoretical concept or even a proof of concept to a fully functioning script tool or even an exploit kit. The Vulcan research team reviewed and rated some of the following sources you see as the most trusted sources. The top two upper sources in the above list are the most reliable sources, which will often have the most mature exploit kits, and the rest of the sources are in descending order, additional sources which also contains in a very high likelihood mature exploits. In Vulcan Cyber, we provide threat intelligence from all of the sources above and more. But when you see exploits from the above list, it's usually a good indication that they are truly being used as a weapon. Now let's take this another step and identify our weak points in the attack surface. The first target that any attacker would go for, as we mentioned, would be to look for public-facing assets. So the most simple method for us to identify these assets would be to examine their IP address and look for all the hosts with an IP address that is within a public IP range. However, sometimes this is not enough. For example, we might have some hosts with an internal IP address, but these hosts are also behind a load balancer that open routes to be accessible from the outside. So some of the scanner might report on these assets as internal hosts, while they are truly external and public facing. Another case would be hosts which their AWS security groups allow for inbound connections from various networks which the attacker might have access to. So not only by IP. So in order to better identify them, we can look for assets which are also exposed behind load balancers, or examine the security groups and firewall rules for assets that may be public facing. Even better, we can also identify assets which might currently not be exposed, but could be if something changes in an external configuration. For example, an asset with a public IP, but currently restricted by security groups or firewall rules, which might change externally and eventually could expose it. So this asset might not be currently an external facing asset, but it could be if something changes without us knowing about it. So these assets could also not just be hosts. They could also be applications, relevant code projects, or other assets which might have higher visibility. And you might want to tag them as such, but looking for information that you have that can help you determine if these assets are external facing. So you can look for that information and also tag them as external assets, which will give you better visibility into the higher risk asset that you have in the system. So once you identify all these assets, you can add them to your risk score in a way that would allow you to prioritize them first, of course, if they are vulnerable as well. So in the Vulcan platform today, we already have an out-of-the-box let me just we already have an out-of-the-box way to identify these kind of assets, and that's by examining a public-facing, external-facing tag that we have. So you can find it under the Vulcan Assets screen. Take a look and see all of the external assets that are being tagged as such. And we can operate by tagging them by IP, by load balancer, and as I mentioned, also security groups. And this exists already now, but in an upcoming release that will be out in several weeks, we can also share more customizable options for this tagging. So you could allow to match any or some of these rules in a way that would tailor that by your own risk appetite. And also to take into account some other tags that you have information on. For example, if you also want to map out code projects. So for example, I can take one of the tags that I have from Black Tag and also use that to understand if some of my code projects also have exposure or I want to prioritize them as such. So we can see that when I go to code project, that I will also have this kind of tagging if I need to. So that's all for today. Thank you for attending my session, and I'll be available in the event chat to answer any questions, and I welcome any of your feedbacks. Now, back to you, Gal.
Thank you, Yossi. So Yossi, the Vulcan Cyber team, and speakers are going to be available in the next few minutes via chat, so feel free to reach us even after the event ends. I want to say special thank you for everyone for attending and supporting the Remediation Summit today, and supporting the greatest mission of owning cyber hygiene and cyber risk. It wouldn't be a conference, of course, without the conference swag. So if you gave us your shipping address when you registered, please watch for a pair of Vulcan Cyber socks in the mail very, very soon. If there's a problem, just reach out. You can find us at vulcancyber.io or simply follow us on LinkedIn. And then until next time, We're looking forward to the next event. Have a wonderful rest of the day and happy holidays.